Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us this evening. Whether you're from Godalming XR or XR in general, or just someone generally interested in hemp, it's great to have you with us this evening. Um, it's my pleasure to introduce Guy Coxall. Many of you might have heard of. He's a great exponent of hemp and the hemp trade. Founder member of the Cannabis Trades Association, the CTA, and also chair of HempTank, the UK think tank on hemp education and policy. Is also heavily involved with R&D in the use of hemp, plastics, textiles, etc. I could go on, but I'll probably ask Guy to do a quick introduction to himself, for himself rather. Just a few points about this evening. Obviously, it's a Zoom meeting, so you're all muted. You can, if you're familiar with Zoom, or even if you're not familiar with Zoom, there's a button on the bottom of your screen called chat. If you bring that up, if you've got any questions you'd like to ask, you can write those in to the questions, the person called questions, which is a multicolored banner, but on the chat, it's just send the message to questions, and then that'll be looked at during the talk, and then we'll try and get through as many of the questions at the end, when Guy's finished his presentation. We will be recording the session tonight, so it will be available hopefully at a later date on one of the Godalming sites, whether it's the Facebook or the general website we've got. So, Guy, over to you. I mean, obviously we're interested in the way hemp can affect us in terms of climate change, and I mean, I'm also really interested to know where we are with the legal situation in the UK, because we seem to be lagging behind the rest of the world. So, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. So I'm just going to share my screen here so that we can put on this PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully everyone can see that now. So as Sean just mentioned, yeah, I'm the chairman of HempTank, the UK's think tank for the hemp industry. I set that up about nearly 3 years ago now. So we do a lot of hemp education, attend a lot of meetings. I've attended some events related to Extinction Rebellion to look at hemp as a solution to the climate catastrophe unfolding at the moment. The website is at the bottom there, so you should have this. I think the presentation will be available as well if anybody wants to go over it at a later date. I've been involved in the CBD industry from the beginning. For the past 3 years, I was the compliance director for the CBD industry across Europe. So I pretty much wrote the regulations for CBD. It's become a huge industry over the last few years. It's outcompeted vitamin C and vitamin D combined. It's expected to be worth £1 billion in the UK by 2025. And it helps a hell of a lot of people. I think there's currently about 6 million people in the UK regularly take CBD for a mass array of different conditions. I do work with the medical side as well, but hemp is really my main motivation. So what HempTank does, we support farmers, we help them get licenses to grow hemp. We work with businesses and entrepreneurs looking at new technologies which can help our economy, help mitigate climate change and create jobs in the UK. We look at the infrastructure for harvesting the plant, new processing techniques. We look at agronomy. I've done some research work with ADAS, which is a big agricultural firm. And I attended a meeting recently with the NFU as well, the National Farmers Union. Soil restoration is a massive thing at the moment. Our soil is drastically depleted. And attend all sorts of meetings and events. But because I've been working with several government organisations over the past several years, we haven't really got anywhere. In fact, everything's going backwards. The CBD industry is failing. It might be depleted in the next 9 months. So I wanted to look more at some sort of campaign using non-violent civil disobedience, using the same sort of methodology as XR. So this is really what I'm talking about. So I'm going to give you an overview, a 101 if you like, on everything about hemp. So the cannabis classification, there's different types of cannabis. Most people don't realize that hops, what you make beer from, is part of the Cannabaceae family, so it's quite closely related to cannabis. In fact, you can actually find small levels of CBD and THC within hops. You have Cannabis sativa L, which is generally industrial hemp, mainly because it's a very tall crop, so you can use the fiber and the stalk for different industrial uses. Cannabis indica is more common. It's a short crop, and it's more commonly used for smoking recreationally or taking as a medicinal. And Cannabis ruderalis is a very small crop. It grows very quickly, and it doesn't have auto light dependency, so it will go into flowering mode. So this is normally mixed with some industrial crops to make the lifespan shorter, so that we can get maybe even 2 crops in 1 year in the UK. It's a very versatile plant, thousands of different commercial uses. It can be grown very sustainably on marginal land without the use of pesticides, herbicides, insecticides. It's a medicinal herb, which we'll go into in more detail. So the difference between hemp and cannabis, people ask me this a lot. Hemp is basically cannabis, it's just low-level THC. So generally in the EU, it has to contain less than 0.2% THC, THC being the psychoactive compound. 0.3% in the US, and in Switzerland, they're allowed up to 1%. So it's virtually impossible, because it has such high levels of CBD. CBD actually counteracts the effects of THC. A lot of people don't know that. So it is virtually impossible to get any high from hemp. It's non-psychoactive completely. All parts of the plant can be used. The seed can be used for oil, for protein powder, as a biodiesel. The flowers for medicinal properties. The leaves are used commonly as a tea. The stalk has many uses, and even the roots have medicinal properties. So everything that's above these levels of THC is what we regard to cannabis, or some people call it marijuana. And it's just high levels of THC, but it can still be used for industrial purposes. In fact, by increasing the THC level, you actually increase the seed yield. It can actually be a better crop. I think part of the reason for hemp having such low amounts of THC is more in the interest of corporations. So a little bit about the history. Hemp's been used as an agricultural crop. In fact, it's believed to have been the oldest agricultural crop in history. There's evidence of it being used in Mesopotamia over 10,000 years ago. It's been used in Chinese medicine for over 120 different diseases for over 5,000 years, over 1,000 years in India. And in the past, it was mandatory to grow hemp across most of Europe. For medicines, food, rope for the navy, paper, textiles, animal bedding, lamp fuel, all sorts of things. It was an essential part of our economy, and in King Henry VIII's time, he decreed that all landholders had to set a small part of land aside to grow hemp. And this was mainly for his new navy. The ropes, the sailcloth, and the clothing was all made from hemp. And every ship that went out to navigate and find new colonies actually carried hemp seed with it, and it was the first crop that they laid down. So the colonization of the world through the British Empire was built on hemp. And in Queen Elizabeth I's reign, she used it for medicinal use, and farmers were fined for not growing it. Unfortunately, it's a very different picture today. It's almost the opposite. So this brings us to cannabis prohibition. Cannabis has been prohibited for over 80 years now. It began in the 1930s when the US Bureau of Narcotics following the prohibition of alcohol, which failed quite dramatically, they built a propaganda machine called the Gore Files. This used a lot of lies and misinformation to look at cannabis as a dangerous drug, which led to crime, violence, and insanity. I think most people who know anything about the plant knows it is anything, but it doesn't cause violence. That's more alcohol. So much of this propaganda was targeted at ethnic minorities. So it was based on ideology and racism. So just a couple of quotes from the Gore Files here. And please, this isn't mine, please don't be offended. There are 100,000 marijuana smokers in the US. Most are Negroes, Hispanic, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic jazz music related from marijuana use. Marijuana use made women seek sexual relationships with Negroes, entertainments, and others. It's addictive drug which produces in its user insanity, criminality, and death. I don't know if anybody's ever watched some of the old 1930s propaganda movies, but they're really off the wall. You smoke a joint and you're likely to kill your brother. Marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind. Marijuana influenced Negroes to look at white people in the eye, step on white men's shadows, and look at white women twice. So a lot of the propaganda was based on racism, and this is still happening today in the police and judicial system, where there's institutional racism. A recent Freedom of Information Act request showed that about 75% of cannabis-related arrests in the UK are with Black and ethnic minorities. So unfortunately, that's stuck. It was a very big propaganda campaign which worked very successfully, and in 1937 it led to the Marijuana Tax Act, and this was Harry Anslinger, who was the head of the Bureau of Narcotics. He was quite a racist. William Randolph Hearst, who was a media mogul, owned a lot of newspapers and had quite a lot of interest in the timber industry, and the Rockefellers and so on with big oil. So they presented this to Congress, and it was passed without very little discussion. This effectively prohibited cannabis across the United States through taxation. So I think we all know that the problems that we have today with climate change are due to monopolies with corporations, and these corporations have, pretty much destroyed this planet and health across the world. So the pharmaceutical industry had a lot to lose with cannabis. In fact, prior to 1937, there were over 2,000 Western medicines that were whole plant cannabis based. So if you went to a doctor back then, most likely you would have been given cannabis oil. It was used for all sorts of different things. But of course, because it's got 500 different compounds that all work synergistically together, it can't be patented. So they couldn't make money from it. So this led to Western medicine, pharmaceutical medicine becoming isolated and synthetic compounds, so that they could have the monopoly and make money. But obviously these have a lot of drastic side effects. From 1851, cannabis was in the US pharmacopoeia for over 100 different diseases and illnesses. It was deleted in 1942. Cannabis was also deleted from the UK pharmacopoeia in 1937. So the government, who have been saying for 80 years that cannabis has no medicinal value, were basically lying through their truth. They haven't been doing their due diligence. So then we come to big oil. Henry Ford made a Model T Ford in the 1930s, and it was made from a biocomposite, and part of that was hemp. What they found was it was light, it was 10 times stronger than steel. There's Henry Ford, the picture of him hitting it with an axe, and he couldn't even dent it. And he built the entire body of this car made out of a biocomposite made from hemp, and it was all plant-based. It also ran on hemp ethanol, which you can derive from the stalk of hemp. So this was known, and he wrote an article which was published in Popular Mechanics in the 1930s called The $1 Billion Crop, and they basically showed that they could replace oil with oil from the plant. Back then, cellophane was made from hemp, from the hemp cellulose. DuPont and Rockefeller basically wanted the monopoly because they use petrochemicals in medicines as well, nylon, plastics, all sorts of things. So then there was the paper and the cotton industry. So until the late 1800s, over 90% of paper was made from hemp. The first mass-produced books, the King James and the Gutenberg Bibles, were printed on hemp. But then they realized that there were lots of trees out there, let's start cutting them down and making paper from that, thinking it was a resource that would just last forever. Obviously, we know the difference now, and we see all these forests being cut down for the paper industry. Also at the time, cotton was becoming a bigger thing. DuPont had just created nylon, cotton industry was booming, and hemp and cloth was a major competitor. So really most people think that cannabis was prohibited due to the THC, the psychoactive element of the plant, but it was actually because it was the main monopoly, the hemp industry, for all these corporations. So this led on to 1961 when they had the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs at the UN building in New York. Cannabis became a Schedule 1 drug, and Schedule 1 basically means it's the most dangerous category. So it's in there with heroin, cocaine, things like that, LSD. High potential for abuse and no medicinal value. Of course, you look at alcohol, you look at tobacco, you look at sugar. These all fit the definition of Schedule 1 drugs, but none of them have ever been scheduled. As this law was based on ideology and racism, there is actually no foundational evidence for cannabis ever being a Schedule 1 drug, and this is actually being challenged at the moment. There's going to be quite a hoo-ha in government in the next 6 to 12 months where legal action is going to be taken against the government in regards to these things. Hemp, of course, because it's low THC, it's completely non-psychoactive, completely safe. Even CBD, it was assessed by the World Health Organization as completely safe for humans and animals. It does have medicinal properties, but in UK law, in the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act, the flowers and the leaves are still considered a Schedule 1 drug, which is preposterous. So this goes into corporations where they put profit above life. So the main thing with a corporation is that they have to adhere to their shareholders. They have no responsibility to the environment, to people's health. It's all about profit. We can't allow this business as usual mentality to continue. We need to change, we all know this. But politicians are profiting from corporations. I don't know if you saw it in the news, but Theresa May's husband, when she was the Home Secretary, had a lot of investment in British Sugar and GW Pharmaceuticals, who were growing the biggest medical cannabis field plantation in the world, and most of that has been exported around the world. Also, Victoria Atkins, who was the drugs minister at the time, her husband also was benefiting financially. And, you know, this is pure corruption at the highest levels. But this goes down through the judicial system, down to the police. So it's technically in UN law, in international law, grand political corruption. And this ties in as well with oil companies and so on. It's something we should all be getting on. The government's responsible for people's health, their well-being, and their security. They're failing us, you know, it's obvious. We need to do something, we need to tell the truth. So hemp, can it be a solution to the climate emergency? I certainly believe so, and through the studies and the research I've done, I'm pretty positive it can. So if you look at carbon emissions, the main culprits are the construction industry, power, transport, then about 10% agriculture. So for the construction industry, we have hempcrete. Hempcrete is an amazing material. It's been used for thousands of years in different places. It was even used in caves thousands of years in India. The construction industry, most of the materials they use are mined. It's very toxic. It causes illnesses. it's out of date, and it's damaging to the environment. From what I can tell, about 45% of UK carbon emissions are through the construction industry. So hempcrete, it's long lasting, it's very strong, it's lightweight, it's breathable, so it's a bit like cob, highly insulative, very energy efficient, it's non-toxic, it's flame resistant, water resistant, pest resistant, and carbon negative. So you also don't get molds, it's antibacterial. So 1 cubic meter of hempcrete will sequester approximately 110 kilograms of carbon from the atmosphere. So an average 3-bedroom house generally emits about 50 cubic meters of, about 50 tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, where a hempcrete house of the same size will absorb about 5.5 tons. So there's about 55 tons difference, which is huge. So there was a building for Marks and Spencer's built in 2012 in Cheshire. They said the holistic approach taken to designing the store's sustainable features has resulted in it being 42% more energy efficient, with 40% lower carbon emissions per square foot than any benchmark M&S store. The use of highly innovative building materials such as hempcrete and its exceptional air tightness has resulted in the store using 60% less heating fuel than predicted. One of my directors for HempTank is one of the world experts in hempcrete, and he basically says that you would save about 40% on heating bills over the lifetime of the building generally. So, you know, a carbon negative building that saves that much energy in heating has to be the way forward. Then coming to power, so those buildings can be powered with off-grid systems using hemp. What they've found is they can carbonate the hemp, almost charcoal it, nanofy it, so break the molecules down to nano-sized particles, and you can create an alternative to graphene. Graphene generally is graphite, which is mined, which goes through a chemical process. To produce a gram of graphene costs about £2,000. With this hemp alternative, we can create a ton for £500. So it's 4 million times cheaper, but just as efficient. And scientists across the world, some of my colleagues have been working with this material, and they've created supercapacitors, batteries, and they're working on solar panels now. So these batteries, well, battery supercapacitor hybrids, if you like, outcompete lithium ion. So if you look at lithium ion, you will get about 1,000 charge discharges over the lifetime of the battery before it depletes. With this technology, you get over 100,000 cycles. That's a massive ramp up. And potentially it means these batteries could last over 100 years, and they can be made at a fraction of the price. So if you imagine making a battery bank in a hempcrete house, in fact, one of my colleagues has actually created a hemp battery brick, which is a brick, a normal sized brick made from hempcrete on the outside, and it uses the graphene on the inside. And that generates 4.5 volts, and you can charge an iPad from it. If you built that up in the wall as a battery bank, you can actually build your energy storage into the wall of the house. This technology can also be used in vehicles. So instead of mining lithium, we can use this, we can grow it on site here in the UK, we can manufacture it, and we can make batteries to run cars on. And also use it for solar energy. So we could have off-grid systems, we could have micro-grid systems. If you look at the national grid, we lose about 2/3 of the energy through the grid from the power station by the time it hits your house or business. So really, it doesn't work. We could actually replace the grid completely using this new technology by having it localized with energy storage and solar energy or wind energy or wave energy, whatever is good for that area. So this goes to transport. Obviously, I mentioned the batteries can be used in transport. And hemp biocomposites, as I mentioned, Henry Ford built a car using biocomposites. In fact, most European car manufacturers now use hemp biocomposites in the manufacture. So you've got the Lotus Elise Eco down there at the bottom, Mercedes, BMW, Honda, lots of cars now will contain hemp biocomposite. It's lighter, so usually less fuel, it's stronger, and it's recyclable. It's also good in a crash because when you use glass fiber, that can splinter and actually cause more damage to the occupants of the car. Where with this, it doesn't do that because the fibers are so strong. And then you can look at the actual seed, the seed production. When you make oil from the seed, that makes a really good biodiesel. So you can run diesel cars on that, but you're not actually going so far into using a food crop, because once you've extracted the oil, you're still left with the cake, which is about 50% protein powder, 50% protein, and you can still use that as a food source as well. And then there's hemp ethanol that you can derive from the cellulose in the fiber in the inner stalk of the inner part of the stalk. So that could produce ethanol, which can run petrol cars. So one thing that concerns me with all this talk about getting rid of all petrol and diesel cars and moving to electric cars is the amount of carbon used in producing new cars. That uses more than most of the carbon emissions actually used in the lifetime of the car. So what I would suggest is actually using the cars we already have, adapting them so that you can use the battery and you can use either hemp biodiesel or hemp ethanol and have a hybrid car which isn't going to use any petrochemicals. And if you look at the emissions of biodiesel or the hemp ethanol, it's about 10% of what you get with petrol or diesel. Then there's heating logs. So when you use what's called a decortication process, which separates the outer fiber from the stalk and the shear, the inner woody part, there's about 11% waste. Now this can be compressed into heat logs. So we tested these heat logs a year or two ago, and it outcompeted oak. So you're using the waste material. You get about a flame time of approximately 90 minutes and then about an additional 30 minutes burn time. So just going back to the hypothesis of using a carbon negative hemp house powered by hemp, your vehicle powered by hemp, and you can even heat it in the winter using the byproduct from the hemp. And then bioplastics. So we've been working with companies producing bioplastics. They've got great properties. It's very strong. It outcompetes petrochemical plastics for strength and durability. Some of them are completely compostable, like the PLA. You have a mix of PLA using starch and the hemp. And we're developing a new process of using nanocellulose, where you break the particles down into nano size. And you can create either something very dense and hard, which you can use in construction, which will last for hundreds of years, or you can make completely biodegradable, compostable wrappers for food products, which are also edible. And you can just spray it with ink, like vegetable dyes to put design and your information on, and you can, they'll decompose in about 3 months completely back into soil. And obviously plastics is a massive issue at the minute. So we can virtually replace most petrochemical plastics using hemp. There's still a lot of technology and work to do. Some of them do need to be mixed with petrochemical plastics to get different strengths and durabilities, but you know, it's something that we can work on. And then soil restoration. So, you know, our soil is so depleted, we're looking at 20 to 30 years of crops before our soil is completely depleted here in the UK. So I've been talking to the NFU and ADAS on this, and the Soil Association, sorry. So soil restoration. So the UK government a couple of years ago pledged £10 million a year to restore our soils, but currently there hasn't been a plan. Hemp is a very good phytoremediator. So what that means is it will absorb all the heavy metals and toxins out of the soil and cleans the soil. They actually grew hemp around the Chernobyl disaster site to clear up the radiation. It shows how good it is. but it will take out all sorts of things, lead, mercury, and so on. Obviously, you wouldn't want to use that as a food source. It's a very good nutrient accumulator. It has a deep tap root, so it breaks up the soil pan. It prevents soil erosion where needed on hillsides. And you can also use activated biochar from hemp, which is a great carbon capture. I'm going to go into, I've got a slide later in the talk, so I will come back to that. And then there's the hemp seed. So the hemp seed, as I mentioned, it's very good as an oil for biodiesel. And in fact, 1 acre of hemp can produce 300 gallons of oil, diesel, which is quite spectacular. And the waste product, the cake I was talking about, will produce 3 tons of protein powder. So if we're looking at resilience with climate change, this crop is probably one of the best crops that we can actually grow for food dependency. For, you know, the seed is the safest, most digestible, balanced, natural and complete source of protein. It's the same protein that we produce naturally in our bodies, within our blood. So it's very easily digestible. We don't use any energy actually absorbing it. It also contains all 21 amino acids. Normally that's not possible without meat or fish. So perfect for the plant-based diet. And it also has the perfect ratios of omegas 3 and 6. It outcompetes fish oil. So, you know, as a source for resilience in the future, hemp will be great for nutrition and potentially a fuel. So next, I'll just go into cannabinoids a bit because the medicinal part is very important. You know, the war on drugs has basically been a war on health. We need cannabinoids for health and to survive. So the prohibition led to the removal of phytocannabinoids. So you have endocannabinoids, which we produce naturally in our body. Every mammal on the planet has an endocannabinoid system, and we're born with this. And every mammal's breast milk contains cannabinoids. So we use this to help our immune system, basically regulate every system within our body. And this was identified in 1992, over a quarter of a century ago, and it's still not taught in medicine. So we need phytocannabinoids from plants, which you only find really the full spectrum in the cannabis plant, including hemp. We need this in our diet. This has undoubtedly led to mass pain, suffering, and genocide for almost a century. You know, I work with lots of colleagues who are now curing, I think they've been able to cure over 32 different types of cancer, diabetes, loads of different diseases are being helped with cannabis. Even though it might not always be a cure, it depends on, everybody's got a different endocannabinoid system, and different plants will have different ratios. So you have to match that up to the person for it to be most efficient. But there's a lot of research globally going into this. And really, for us not to be able to access these cannabinoids, it is basically genocide over the last 80 years. So history is repeating itself, and the second prohibition will probably occur in the next 9 months. In November 2018, through public support of Alfie Dingle, the little boy with epilepsy, I don't know if you remember it on the news, they legalized medical cannabis, but they made it so restrictive that it's virtually impossible for anybody to get prescription. You can only get a private prescription if you can afford £2,000 a month for it. There's only been a handful of NHS prescriptions. And this is basically, again, because Big Pharma don't want it. So they're trying to ban CBD at the moment. As I said, 6 million people rely on CBD products. Novel Foods, which is a part of the European Commission, have been trying to ban it the last 12 months. And it looks like all you'll be able to get at most is isolate, which won't work because you need all of the cannabinoids working together. It works as a synergy and creates homeostasis within your system. So, as I mentioned, the discovery of the endocannabinoid system was in 1992. It has processes in appetite, pain sensation. I think in the UK over the last 2 or 3 years, Pharmaceutical companies have lost about £300 million in sales of painkillers like ibuprofen and aspirin, things like that, due to the CBD industry. And of course, it's natural and no side effects. It affects every part of your body, even your skin. So there's a bit of information there. The ECS is estimated to be 600 million years old. So it almost seems that we've evolved with the plant. So just a list here, just spend 10 seconds, just quickly go and look at reading through that. So that just shows what a competitor it is to pharmaceutical industries. Okay, so it's enough about cannabinoids. Obviously, I'm happy to answer any questions on any of this afterwards. So farming is massively important, and what's happening at the moment, you know, the reducing the food safety. We're looking at chlorinated chicken coming in from the US and things, and you know, the suicide rate in the population is highest in farmers. Farmers really need our assistance right now, but also farming needs to change. It's not being sustainable. Mass farming with machinery and you know, monoculture crops isn't sustainable, and especially all the different synthetic fertilizers. We need to change ways. We need to be looking at things like agroforestry systems, breaking farms down into smaller farms so that we can utilize the land in better ways. So 1 hectare of industrial hemp absorbs 22 tons of carbon dioxide. It can grow to up to 4 meters in 100 days. It's the fastest CO2 to biomass conversion tool available in the UK. More efficient than agroforestry. It creates more biomass than short rotation coppice with fast-growing willow. As I mentioned, it's a phytoremediator, so it cleans the soil, brings up nutrients. And it can also be intercrop for the legumes such as clovers and peas to increase the nitrogen content. I mentioned hemp char before, so we've been looking at a hemp char project. Recently, the Soil Association did a project where they were using biochar from forestry. Basically, biochar, if you don't know, is basically charcoal, but used into the soil instead of burning it. The biomass can be used to create a biochar, which can be fed to livestock. So it increases the health of the animals. It helps their digestive system. Those people who have toxins in the system or are poisoned, if they go to hospital, they're normally given charcoal, and it absorbs all the toxins and takes it out of your system. So the same sort of thing with animals. It helps increase their appetite. But the really interesting thing is it reduces the methane and ammonia output. So what they found in this study was that it reduced the methane output in cattle by 22% by giving them 100 grams a day. And in pigs, it decreased the methane by 55%, which is huge. And that's obviously a massive carbon gas emitter of climate change. Also, biochar, it will lock that carbon into the soil for thousands of years. And it works like a sponge. It has a massive surface area, so it absorbs microorganisms, mycelium, moisture, nutrients, nitrogen, all that sort of thing, and slowly releases it. So it decreases the need in agriculture for water and fertilizer. So by using hemp as a rotational crop, and every so many years having it as a sacrifice crop, so all the biomass you put through a machine to turn it into biochar, feed that to animals, activate it, put it into the soil. That will restore the soil over several years. Once you get to about a 1 to 2% biochar content, that makes a massive change to the soil. Also, instead of using fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers, a lot of organic hemp farmers use manure. So you could have, you know, a farm locally with cattle or pigs. You can feed them, keep them happy, And I know any any plant-based diet people, you know, there's obviously the conversation about livestock, but you know, that's something to talk about. But the manure we can put onto the fields and not have to use any synthetic fertilizers, so we can almost have it as a closed loop system. Links to policy. So there's quite a lot of policies in the UK and in Europe relevant to agriculture and climate change mitigation policies. We've gone through these different policies, and a hemp industry would tick boxes in all of these. So it hits the environment policy, climate change and emissions policy, the clean growth strategy, the bioeconomy, rural development policy, and the UK Green Brexit paper. So this gives us a little bit more oomph, I suppose, if it ties in with the policies of the government. You know, the government have these targets. If we can show them a way to do it and get them to help even fund the infrastructure, you know, that's what we need really. So what we're looking at, what I'm looking at with this Seed the Future project, is full decriminalisation of hemp. At the moment, to grow hemp, you need a license from the Home Office. So farmers have to apply for a Home Office license, which costs £580 for 3 years, but it can cost over £1,000 if they come to inspect it. The hoops you have to jump through are ridiculous. It's very, very difficult for a farmer to know what to put on the application. Even getting into the application is difficult. So really, because it's non-psychoactive and is very different to you know, recreational cannabis or marijuana, there's no need for it to be licensed. So if we were to get rid of the licensing, that would really help farmers. One of the biggest problems with the licensing is you're only allowed to grow the crop for the stalk and the seed. The leaves and the flowers are all classed as controlled substances, Schedule 1 controlled substances, and they have to be destroyed on site. Where if you look across Europe with the CBD industry, farmers who grow the crop, and they'll grow the crop for industrial use, seed, and the flowers alone can reach up to £33,000 per hectare for farmers in Europe. Farmers here in the UK have to destroy the crop. That part of the crop is the most, you know, financially viable part. So also, you're not allowed to share the license. You can't have like cooperatives. And what I'd like to see, because we've got new ways of processing the crop for industrial use, and the seed and the flowers. So what I'd like to see is farmer cooperatives in an area, instead of having to ship the biomass hundreds of miles to a big processing plant, we can do it all on site, and it uses hardly any energy. In fact, we can almost do it as a carbon neutral closed loop system. I can't share too much of the technology at the moment because I'm under an NDA, but the technology's there. We are actually setting one up in Devon this year to play with. So by having a closed loop system locally, we can have, you know, a localized industry. Also smallholders. I live on my land off grid. I've done for several years now, and I've done a lot of looking into planning law. And one of the problems with planning law, if anybody wants to be a smallholder and live sustainably on the land, they have to earn a ridiculous amount of money every year to get planning permission to build themselves an eco house or so on to live on the land. Hemp could be a solution to that. If you grow 2 to 2.5 acres of hemp, that 1 year's growth would be enough to build a 3-bedroom house out of hempcrete. So you can basically grow your own house on site. That will also restore the land, then they can set up agroforestry projects or whatever. But if they kept some land for growing hemp, they would be able to make enough income to fit in with planning laws. So this could actually create a gateway for more people to be able to live on the land sustainably. And also, everybody should be able to grow hemp. You know, we're all going to lose CBD products full spectrum soon. People should be able to grow a hemp plant in their garden, in with their broccoli and their lettuce. You know, it's a completely safe plant. So people will be able to grow their own medicine, grow their own seed, and that would bypass the food laws which are preventing the whole of the CBD industry. This would improve the health of the nation, just taking pressure off the NHS. So, you know, our house is on fire. Can we put out the fire? And it's really interesting times with this COVID-19 situation. It demonstrates the potential for huge change in a short period. You know, I don't like what's going on or the way things have been handled, but, you know, there's very few planes. You know, it really did make a difference. You know, the planet got a bit of a breather, which was really nice. We need to create this new normal, and we need to do it in the right way. We can't go back to business as usual. It seemed that fear, outrage, and urgency was the essential key components for big change. So we're experiencing the largest economic collapse in history at the moment. Health is deteriorating massively. Unemployment is going to soar, and a lot of trust has been lost in the government. So this is the time, I think, that we can create this new normal if we all come together. So the technology is there. We just need the will of the people. We need support from the government. We need these ridiculous laws to be dissolved. And with the technologies that I've just demonstrated and explained, those combined, I think we could reduce carbon emissions by 60 to 80%. And I think we could do it if we really push and do it and start making changes now. We could meet that goal by 2025. So we need a plant B, a rebellion. This was me on the pink boat and last April, where I did a talk about pretty much like this, a talk about hemp as a solution. And it was really the enthusiasm, and I enjoyed the event so much of Extinction Rebellion over the past year, that I thought I love the methodology of non-violent civil disobedience to make a change. We know these protests, these marches and petitions don't work, so we need to do something different. So the methodology of See the Future, it mirrors the Extinction Rebellion ethos and rules for action. So it could be a side off of Extinction Rebellion. We've already got it in place. This is already happening, but there's going to be protests next month in every major city across the UK. The date hasn't been confirmed. It was actually supposed to happen on summer solstice just recently, but people in the group were a bit concerned with the COVID situation. We decided to put it back to next month. But really, I wanted to talk to you guys and some other organisations and see if we can get some numbers up to make, you know, a big impact. So I haven't actually set a date for next month yet. It will probably be in the second quarter of next month. But it's pretty much ready to go, but we can have a chat about this after. So it's using non-violent civil disobedience. The non-violent civil disobedience is the cultivation of hemp without a license. We've distributed over 100 kilograms of seed throughout the UK. These were sent off in kilogram packs with leaflets, stickers, bags, so that people could separate that bag into 5-gram bags. So you get 200 5-gram bags. They're passed out to other people, and then those people can spread that out amongst their friends and family. So we don't really know how many people have grown hemp, but it's definitely in the thousands, possibly in the tens of thousands. So there's tens of thousands of people already broken the law across the UK growing a non-psychoactive plant. We thought about having it as different levels because some people are going to be worried about being at a protest, the police come along, you've got a cannabis plant in front of you, right, we're going to arrest you for cultivation of cannabis without a license. So some people will do the action, and that some people's plants are 4 foot tall now. But what we're going to also have is some disposable paper cups with some soil in it, and people can just get a seed on site, wet it with their saliva, put it in the pot, and that is the act of rebellion as well. You're less likely going to get arrested for putting a seed in a pot of soil. Another way of doing it is to sprout seed, because even the act of sprouting the seed is classed as cultivation of cannabis. So some people will just come along with a handful of sprouted seed. They can then, if they want to be really risque, you can get up to 5 years for cultivation of cannabis. if they were to share those nutritious sprouted seeds with others, then that's distribution, and then you can get up to 14 years for that. It just shows how silly the law is, and that will hopefully be taken up by the media. So up to now, we've got a website, we've got a Facebook group with just over 1.2 thousand people, and we've got regional groups around the UK. So there's planning in process at the moment. People are setting up where they're going to have the events, designing posters and banners, that sort of thing. So together we are stronger. Historical evidence shows that, this is off your website by the way, historical evidence shows that we need the involvement of 3.5% of the population to succeed. So that's about 2 million people. That could be doable, maybe not in the first protest, but maybe in other protests following. Collaboration with yourselves would lead to an increase in awareness of hemp. That's the main thing, is educating the people, getting people behind us. It's a solution, as a solution, it's looking at the political corruption within our government, and it will also increase numbers at rebellions. So it's all a numbers game. Everyone benefits if we are successful. Everyone benefits from the decriminalisation of hemp in many different ways. So as I mentioned, you've got 6 million CBD users. So I'm trying to tap into them. They're obviously going to be outraged when they find out that their product that they rely on. My mum's one example. She has final stage glaucoma, and a few years ago I got her onto CBD, which saved her eyesight. She had a 90% chance of losing her eyesight. She still has her eyesight because she uses that. If that gets taken away from her, she'll go blind. There's lots of people using it for all sorts of things. There'll be outrage. We've got 1.4 million medical users who use full spectrum cannabis, including THC, who risk prosecution every day. The entire farming industry, and I'm thinking if we can tap into XR farmers. Obviously, all of us environmentalists can get numbers up. Vegetarians, vegans. The EU were actually looking recently at banning hemp seed because of minute amounts of THC in it. We can't allow that to happen. So there could be links with animal rebellion. And black and ethnic minorities, as I mentioned, you know, there's a big racist element to this. So I'm looking at maybe getting them involved as well. So what can Extinction Rebellion do to supporters? So I think the main thing really is promoting the actions that are going to be happening next month. If we can get this in all the Facebook groups across the UK, maybe in the emails, just make XR activists aware that this is happening and give them the information. If they want to join in, they'd be more than welcome. I'm not brilliant with PR, and I have been talking to Marco, who seems to know a lot more than me. So it would be great, a little bit of support on PR, media, even leaflet, banner design creation, collaboration on further actions. I think, you know, this protest next month's not just going to be a one-off. I think we can generate and get it bigger by having more actions, even over a couple of weeks, like Black Lives Matter did. I think, you know, really this also should fit into the citizens' assemblies. I think hemp needs to be there. So there's some contact details for See the Future. That's the website. The Facebook group is basically just See the Future. I can put a link in there as well for you if you like. Thank you very much for listening, and get on to questions.
Thanks very much, Guy, for that. That's excellent presentation, and I'm sure we're all fascinated by the number of uses to which hemp can be put. Certainly one or two there that I'd never heard of before. Where are we with legislation? And are we out of kilter with the rest of Europe, or? Yeah.
I mean, you don't need, you know, the licensing regime in the UK, especially the part of not being able to use the flowers or leaves, is unique to the UK alone. I mean, in 2018, they passed the Farm Bill in the US, and now the whole of the US is growing hemp. There's that they're creating their whole hemp industry. You know, we're lagging behind, and we really can't afford to. And we've got.
So there's no sign of the UK changing their mind.
No.
No. All right. Well, Duncan's been working in the sidelines there, gathering questions, and so hopefully he's got. I'm sure he's got many lined up for you.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you very much, Guy, for that talk. That was really, it's really exciting actually to hear everything that's going on, and I'm sure we've got some people on tenterhooks ready to hear what you have to say about the particular questions they have for you. So, a question from Carol to start with. How can I help fund some of the positive uses of hemp, getting it from research and development into the market?
Okay, thank you for the question. Yeah, it's the problem is it's a bit of a catch-22 situation. Until we can get farmers on site growing hemp, we don't have the resources to get the facilities for, you know, there will be funding opportunities coming up for the new processing, harvesting and so on. But really, we need to get the truth out there first. We need to get the restrictions eased or removed completely, and get farmers growing. There are some farmers growing, and there are opportunities for investment, and I'm happy to pass information and links. But really, I think the most urgent thing is to make the change first and get it so that all farmers are growing it as a rotational crop. But
Cool.
you will. Can you make sure that my email goes out as well? info@hemptank.co.uk. Happy for you to send me an email, and I can put you in touch if you're wanting to invest.
Thank you very much, Guy. Let's see. Okay, we have a question from Louisa next. What sort of acreage would hemp need to be grown on in order to make it a viable alternative to petrochemicals on a global scale?
That's a very good question. I don't really know the answer, but as I said, you know, you can get 300 barrels of oil from an acre. We'd have to do the math, really. We'd have to look at how many gallons of oil are used in the UK as an example, or worldwide, and then work out how much land is used. I mean, the great thing is, because all arable farming can use it as a rotational crop, it's a great break crop, and it helps to restore the soil. So if we work out how much land is used for growing crops, and if we said, you know, that every 4 years, that's going to cover the entire area of arable land, then we can work out, well, we could actually create enough for every petrol car and every diesel car in the country. But sorry, I don't have the full answer for that.
That's okay. No, thank you. Thank you for that. We shall go away and try and do the maths.
Yeah.
Okay, now a question on land use. So the problem with transitioning fuel use from fossils to land crops is the huge competition for land that we already have from forestry and agriculture and animal feed, as well as biofuels, of course. So you mentioned how productive it was, and again just now with the 300 gallons of oil from an acre. Does the number of applications of hemp help reduce the stress on land when it's needed for those other uses as well?
Yeah, so as I said in the presentation, because it's so dynamic, and you know, obviously we don't want to use land. A question that comes up a lot is we don't want to use land to create oil for fuel for cars if it's interrupting the food chain, especially at the moment. But because you don't even have to use the seed, you could keep the oil for food and the protein powder. And you could just use the ethanol from the cellulose, and you're not interrupting the food chain at all. And as I said, by using it as a rotational crop, you're not interrupting the food chain too much. In fact, you're actually helping to restore the soil, which will actually make it easier to grow future crops, other crops for future generations. So it's going to positively impact our food security for future generations.
Oh, well, that's at my address. And let's find another question. Before I go on, Sean, can I check sort of what time we're aiming for to stop to finish up today, just so I don't keep asking questions till 9?
I think it's 7:30, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think 7:30.
Did I run over a bit? I mean, I'm available if you want to go on a little bit more.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to check, just to remind myself what I was aiming for. Thanks. Okay, next we have a question on which one to ask about. So a couple of people are asking what is so special about hemp that it grows so much better than other plants, regarding special properties that it has. And are there any other plants with similar fast-growing properties that can grow from depleted soil?
Not in this country. Bamboo is comparable. The only one that is close in this country is Salix viminalis, which is a very fast-growing willow, but that depletes the soil. It doesn't produce as much biomass, and obviously you don't get any food or nutrition or all the other uses from it. So yeah, there isn't anything that competes really.
Cool, so it's hemp or bust.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And next, just trying to see which ones I've already asked, so I don't ask them again. I've got a question on, oh yes, do hemp plants, this is from Louisa, do hemp plants occur anywhere in the wild anymore, and if so, where?
Not, they do in Asia. It's a mountainous plant actually, and if you go to Asia, my father did the Annapurna circuit years ago and told me quite excitedly that there was cannabis growing all at the mountains. So it does grow naturally in certain places, but it's generally used as an annual crop, not a perennial crop. It's you know, it can go to seed and then drop seed and come back, but it's unusual. It's really something that needs planting every year.
Good to know, thanks. And that's interesting actually, because bamboo is usually associated with more Eastern countries, more sort of Asian countries. So,
Yeah.
Cool.
It grows naturally. It grows naturally in Russia as well. The ruderalis that I mentioned at the beginning, the short, the one with the autoflowering gene, that grows naturally in Russia and grows wild.
That sparks another question in my head, which is what's the legal situation in, what's sort of the balance of legal versus illegal, and the situation on hemp worldwide? Is it generally illegal, or is it generally legal?
Generally legal, yeah. Yeah, there's not normally much of a problem. I mean, things are changing all the time. Obviously, since medical cannabis became more worldwide, you know, the whole of Canada is completely legal. A lot of the US now, and that's moved. They kind of went backwards in the US. They started with medical cannabis, high THC cannabis, and then just legalized hemp, which is you'd expect it to be the other way around. But because it's such an old age crop that's been used for thousands of years, you know, a lot of the world has always grown hemp. China's the biggest grower in the world, and they use it. That most hemp textiles, this T-shirt is 100% hemp. Most of the textiles are coming from China, but we would like to set up a textile mill here in the UK. So it's really the Western world that's taken a bit of time through prohibition to start bringing it back, but the UK is lagging behind everywhere else.
I suppose that possibly relates to the commercialization of health and of medicine and things, and how somehow particularly Western companies are so good at it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, they're better with natural medicine, which is better really.
And talking about consuming hemp, are there any nice to eat hemp-based foods?
Are there any what? Sorry.
Nice to eat, enjoyable hemp-based foods.
Yeah, I mean the seed itself, you can buy what's called hemp hearts, which are basically just the shells that have been removed from the seed. and you can buy them in most supermarkets, most health food shops, and you can. They have a neutral taste, so it can go with sweet or savoury dishes, and that can be sprinkled on your salad or your porridge or whatever. Really good for you. But yeah, it can be used in all sorts. It can be used. The flour can be used to make bread, pancakes, all sorts. Yeah, and the oil, of course, as well is used a lot. I use hemp milk in my coffees and teas, which you can buy in most supermarkets now in the UHT area. Hemp milk's really good for you. So yeah, I mean, it needs to be expanded. But as I said, for a plant-based diet, it's probably one of the best things you can have for health.
Yes, I thought I was pushing the boat out by getting some pea milk, but I've not seen hemp milk yet, so I'll have to go explore that UHD section.
Yeah.
And I'd like to ask a little about fossil fuels and car manufacturers. So where do car manufacturers get hemp from legal sources in large quantities? I think that's for the purpose of actually making the cars. Is that from the bioplastics?
Yeah. There was a lot of grow in about 10-15 years ago. Quite a large area in the southeast of the UK was growing hemp, and that was being exported to Europe for car manufacturing. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, and that company moved to Europe. But yeah, it's mainly grown in Europe. France, for fibre products, for including biocomposites for car manufacturing, France is the biggest grower. But there's nothing stopping us doing it here. We've got Nissan up in the northeast. We could easily supply them for car manufacturing.
Cool. And to follow on from that, do oil companies, does big oil lobby car manufacturers to continue using their fossil oils?
I don't think they need to really. I mean, biodiesels from plants are starting to grow throughout the world, but it's still very small amounts. I don't think big oil is scared enough at the moment to worry about lobbying so much. Most of the lobbying in the UK from corporations is big pharma, not big oil at the minute. But obviously, as this new technology, the battery technology and the biofuels, once they see that becoming a reality, then I would imagine the lobbying will start. But of course, if it hadn't happened in 1937 with the Marijuana Tax Act, we would all be we'd all have hempcrete houses, we would all be running our cars on hemp fuel, and fossil fuels would never have become a thing. It was because of the prohibition that was unfortunately knocked out.
And question on hemp clothing now. When is hemp clothing going to hit the runway?
It's already hit me. I've got 100% hemp trousers, jeans, t-shirts, but they are hard to come by, unfortunately. The problem is the cotton industry is such a massive industry. It's very difficult to compete with a new material. And again, it was the prohibition that stopped that from happening. There is a company in Eastern Europe. Where is it? I can't remember the name of the country. Sorry, it's somewhere in Eastern Europe anyway. They're making textiles, and China, as I said, are the biggest textile producers, but it's a lot more expensive. This t-shirt costs £30 for a t-shirt, but it's 4 times stronger than cotton. It's got great thermal dynamics. It keeps you warm in the winter, cool in the summer. It's naturally antibacterial. Be great for NHS uniforms. And they're actually making masks now for COVID out of hemp material. So it is something that can grow, but obviously, when you've got such a big competitor like cotton, it needs to be built up. It's all scalability to be able to compete in the market. It's really consumer decisions. We need to look at the sustainability. Cotton uses about 50% of the world's agricultural water. about 25% of the world's pesticides. So it destroys environments, destroys waterways, destroys soil. It's a very intensive, bad, most people think cotton, no, it's plant, it's fine, it's okay, it's natural. But, it's devastating. And you've got a lot of child labor producing these things in Asia and so on. So really what I'd like to see is in Lancashire, there's old cotton mills, which are disused. So it'd be really good to look at their local councils and see you've still got a generation of people who know how to work the machinery. If we can get hemp grown to scale and use process those fibers well, the new processing that I can't tell you too much about uses a delignification process. So what it basically does is when you process the fiber, it removes the lignin and the pectin, and it makes almost silk-like fibers, very clean. And that's a drop-in replacement for textiles. Before that, you had decortication plants, which cost millions of pounds, are very energy intensive, and you don't get very good fibers. They're quite itchy and not very good quality. So this new processing that we're about to implement in the UK this year is a game changer. So that makes it easier for farmers, it makes it localized, but we also have a drop-in replacement for textiles. So if we got one of those old cotton mills up in Lancashire back into production to create hemp clothing, we can supply it locally in the UK. And the fibers as well, once the delignification process has happened, it's also a drop-in replacement for paper, because one of the biggest problems is removing, like when you use wood pulp, is removing the lignin, but it's already done through the processing.
What are the barriers? Is it a legal barrier to getting hold of one of those old cotton mills that you mentioned?
I wouldn't imagine so. They're sat there empty. You just need a bit of investment to get them up and going. And if we can grow the material here, it's a no-brainer, really.
So that would also help answer the question at the beginning when someone wanted to know about how to help with investing.
Investment,
That's one potential destination for funds.
Yeah, I think going back to the investment question. Yeah, I mean, there's this new processing. We can set up processing plants. We can set up getting harvesting's quite difficult because it's such a big, strong plant. It's almost like a tree. You need specialist harvesting equipment, so we need investment for that. And then there's all the actual end-use markets. So paper mills, converting paper mills from tree paper to hemp paper, changing cotton mills to hempen mills. Setting up graphene companies for battery production, oil press places for nutrition and fuel. There's a myriad of investment needed, but I think we need to do this in the right steps. We need to sort out the legal side of it first, get rid of all the legislation which is stopping it, stop all the corruption in government, get people to know how important this plant is, and that will create enough interest in investment markets and just the motivation to help save the world. I think that it will happen naturally.
And related to this basic requirement we have to get this law changed and to get enough public opinion behind us, how much public pressure do you need? Basically, how much pressure, how much effort do you need, and what do you think the tipping point will be to get this change that we need?
I mean, as you guys say, 3.5%, 2 million people. If we can get 2 million people out protesting, or even just even online in some way through social media or a petition or something, basically saying we need to change this law. We just need enough pressure on the government to make that change. I envisage that these protests next month, we might only have maybe a couple of thousand people across the UK attending. You might only have 50 people attending in Birmingham or Bristol or London or whatever. But that's enough for a protest, especially with social distancing. Once that hits the local media, so we get the local media who generally aren't owned by the corporate government, so they'll tell the truth more, if we have that in every major city across the UK, hopefully that will all feed into the national media, and they'll have to keep the story fairly accurate in line with all their local media. So if we can get it enough to have it in the papers so that people are reading about this plant, and it's amazing that people just don't know about hemp. It's been suppressed so well in history. We just need to get that truth told, and I think people will be behind it. There's just so many positives to it, and yeah, 2 million people. If we can get 2 million people out on the streets, that would do it. But that would also hopefully hit all the benefits, or everything XR wants to do as well. Because it is all corporate lobbying.
It can all feed in together. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to work together. Yeah.
And to get those 2 million people, are there any in favour? Are there any champions we have? Any celebrities that we can bend the ear of, and or have you got anybody in the pipeline that you're doing some again perhaps with Marco doing some PR with?
Apparently, Piers Morgan. Apparently, he's quite pro cannabis. I mean, I'd like to get Woody Harrelson over from the States, because he's a well-known activist for promoting hemp. He's been doing it for a long time. If we could get him over, that'd be great. Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few celebrities, I think, that take medicinal cannabis for different issues. What was the actor called? Ben Kingsley. He's got a company in London as well. Ben Kingsley. He used it for arthritis, I think. He could be someone. But I think, we just need to tell the story to some celebrities, and I don't think it would be hard to get them on board.
And I'd like to ask a question next from, I think, from Tim. I'm just thinking we've got 7 minutes left till past, so maybe possibly another couple of questions, and then we can wrap up. How does that sound?
Yeah, cool.
Cool. So from Tim asks, how does the thermal mass or insulation of hempcrete or the proposed hemp batteries compare with other options? So thinking about the practicalities of using it to build energy efficient buildings.
The thermal mass of hemp, I've got a huge block of it here, and you can kind of see this would be a section of a wall here. So this is the hemp mixed with lime, and then you've got a lime render on the outside, which would be your inner wall or outer wall. Just touching it, if you had a concrete block, it would be cold to the touch. It's warm. The thermodynamics are that good. It, as I said, it saves 40% on heating bills. I don't know the exact science. I have got a paper somewhere which I could probably share, or I could get my colleague, my director, Graham, who's a hempcrete expert, to answer that question. But because it's breathable, it's very much like cob, but it has better, there's no other building material that has the same thermodynamics. There isn't a competitor in the market, and there has been quite a lot of buildings now grown and built in the UK. So it is becoming bigger. If we could get persimmons in all of these horrible, cheap, nasty, toxic housing to take on hemp and change the whole of the construction industry over to hempcrete, that would be pretty radical, and that would mitigate a lot of the carbon emissions in the UK. And was there a part of the question about the battery technology as well?
I think it was a sort of, I think the question was about the hempcrete or the proposed hemp batteries. So it was about, I think, basically how hemp batteries, for example, compare with other options.
Yeah, so as I said, if you look at lead acid, lithium, or hemp batteries, lead acid battery bank, they all compare in voltage and amperage output, but it's more to do with the life cycle and the expense and not having to mine or use acids or anything like that. Lead acid battery will do 500 cycles. I think it's 1,000 cycles for a lithium battery, and it's 100,000 cycles for a hemp battery. And as I said, you don't need to mine anything, and it costs 4 million times cheaper than graphene. So you can manufacture an off-grid system for a battery system for a 3-bedroom house for about £10,000, and that would include the solar.
And would that power all the needs of the house? Sorry, I'm not sure if you said that.
That would be what you would need for, yeah, washing machine. A standard house. I do have I can't remember how much energy it was, but it was a research project that basically looked at the usage of a normal 3-bedroom house. So it would supply a 3-bedroom house with unlimited energy, basically, what would normal people would use for probably over 100 years. For
Sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it sounds too good to be true, but it is.
Yes, yes, I wasn't going to say that.
People do.
Yes, so the last question I think I'd like to ask tonight, and just to say thank you everyone for sending in your questions. I was I keep popping back up the document I'm using to collect the questions and finding more, so that's really exciting, and sorry we won't get to answer all of them. So this last one is I think quite important. Will hemp, sorry, this is from Pete, this question. Will hemp be able to withstand, i.e. continue to grow and thrive, in the global temperature increases we're expecting in the next few decades?
It's a very good question. It is something I've thought about and been concerned about. I'm part of a panel on working in a project in Devon, which is from rebellion to resilience, and we've been looking at resilience as climate change progresses. It's a very hardy plant. It's very strong. It would be really water that would be the main issue, I think. If we have, we've had a very dry summer this year, and a lot of plants and a lot of trees are struggling. If that increases, it's the same with any plant. I think hemp is a good competitor to a lot of plants. It's a very hardy plant. It grows from the Arctic to the subtropics around the globe. It'll grow pretty much anywhere. I mean, it's called weed for a reason. So, I think compared to other plants, yeah, I think it's a good one to go for. But it's really hard to say. We don't know what we're going to expect in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. It's that's the scary thing, not knowing. Especially if we get feedback loops, look at what's happening in the Arctic and Eastern Siberian shelf with methane releases. We just don't know, but we've got to try, and I think this is the best chance we have.
Yeah, I agree. we just have to do something. We have to try. We have to make the effort, and I think that's where we're going to leave the questions for tonight.
Great,
so thanks again to everyone for sending those in. And I might pass over to Sean to wrap up for tonight. And thank you, Guy, very much for answering all those questions.
You're welcome. Thank you, Duncan.
Great. Well, thanks once again, Guy, for a fascinating talk. I think we've all learnt an awful lot tonight, and I think a lot of us will be joining you in your campaign. I think it seems such a no-brainer, really. It's fascinating where all the objection comes from, really, when you look at all the upside. So yeah, it's got to happen, and especially if Europe and America have taken the plunge, then we're just going to suffer as a result, because we're going to have to import it from them, aren't we? So yeah. So yes, hopefully that's inspired a lot of people, and yeah, thank you very much again, Guy, and good luck with the rest of your campaign.
Thank you. Just before we go, I am updating the website, so there will be a new page, hopefully over the weekend, which will go into more detail about what's going to be happening, the protests, and links to finding more information in your local area. Great.
Well, thanks. Thank you very much, Guy. And thanks everyone for attending tonight, and I hope you all learned a lot. And good night.
Yes, thank you.